Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's City Talk. Your MC for this evening is an award-winning broadcaster, TV presenter, and music journalist. Best known for her long career in radio on Triple J and Double J, she is behind the acclaimed Take 5 podcast and primetime TV series, and co-hosts the pop culture podcast Bang On alongside Miff Warhurst. Passion, curiosity, and creativity drives everything she does. Would you please welcome Zan Rowe?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's City Talks, Making Space for Culture, the future of Sydney's creative economy. We're gathering on Gadigal land tonight, a part of the Eora Nation, and I acknowledge the elders past and present and pay my respects to them. I also acknowledge all Indigenous people in the room tonight. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I am your host for this evening. It's going to be an incredible night, and soon I'm going to be joined by people working across the community as we get into the nitty-gritty and explore ways that we can proactively support Sydney's creative sector over the next decade. We'll look at the 4 pillars of the City of Sydney draft cultural strategy, and we'll hear from global, state and local cultural leaders. It is quite the lineup, as some of you may have seen. Very soon we're going to hear from the Lord Mayor of Sydney, Clover AO, the Honourable John Graham MLC, Special Minister of State, Minister for Roads, Minister for the Arts, Minister for Music and the Nighttime Economy, and Minister for Jobs and Tourism. How does he find the time to turn up to this City Talk? I'll be speaking with Claudia Karvan, one of Australia's most respected and acclaimed film and television actors and producers. And all the way from London, a special treat, Justine Simons, OBE, the Deputy Lord Mayor of London for Culture and the Creative Industries, will join us. Justine's also founder and chair of the World Cities Culture Forum. You'll want to hear this keynote. We're going to be joined by a panel of experts from film, fashion, from urban planning and government and performing arts, and be treated to a special performance from ARIA award-winning singer-songwriter Dan Sultan. After our panel discussion tonight, there'll be a performance you won't want to miss, so do stick around. It's going to be very, very special, that's all I'll say. Tonight's goal is to share information, to share inspiration, to build a future, and really invite you to find real-world solutions to keep the cultural heartbeat of Sydney pumping and pumping fast. Before we get into it, the most exciting part of the night, housekeeping. I have to do this, I'm so sorry. In the case of an emergency, an announcement will be made, so please follow the instructions from the venue staff. Bathroom facilities are located to my left, so your right of the hall. And to exit the Sydney Town Hall tonight, please use the exit doors to the left and right of the hall. When I was little, I wanted to be an air hostess, can you tell? Please keep your phones on silent, but do use them. I'll explain that in just a moment. We're going to be taking some photos tonight of the event too, to capture what we're talking about today and your faces as we discuss it. If you don't want to be photographed, these are just going to be used by City of Sydney for brochures and flyers and advertisements. If you don't want that, please just raise your hand so we can identify you. And our fantastic Auslan interpreters are here with us tonight. Please welcome David and Elisa from Deaf Connect. So here's where your phones come in. Tonight you're going to have the chance to send your questions to the panel, and I'll ask them on your behalf via Slido. So scan the QR code on the screen, or visit city.sydney/ask on your phone, and you can type in your question to the panel, and we'll try to get to that tonight in our panel discussion coming up. You can ask a question via that link at any time too. We're always going to be looking at those questions, so please do. All right, let's get into it. I'd like to welcome to the stage Yvonne Weldon, AM, from the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council and the City of Sydney Councillor, to the stage for a welcome to country.
Good evening, Minister fellow councillors, Mayor Clover, sisters and brothers, everyone, all genders and identities. As was said, my name is Zan Rowe. I am a Wiradjurian from Cowra, here in New South Wales. From the waters of the Clare, which later became known as the Lachlan, and of the Murrumbidgee rivers. I am a representative of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, who are the culture authority under the Aboriginal Land Rights Act for the land we are gathered on. I'd like to pay my respects to all elders, past and present, to all First Nations, to you, and the many ancestors' lands that you've travelled from. The landscapes of this country tells the stories of our culture, our history, and our boundaries. The Eora Nation's boundaries are the Hawkesbury River in the north, the Nepean in the west, and the Georges River in the south. On behalf of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, the elders, and the members, I welcome everyone to the lands of the Gadigal. I acknowledge the Gadigal people whose spirits and ancestors will always remain with this land, our Mother Earth. Our practices have sustained us throughout the generations, and they're ingrained to the core of this country, working together as one community and achieving as one community through the hundreds of nations, tribes and clans existing here for over 65,000 years. My people are the oldest continuous culture of the world. And as we're joined here this evening, let's all reflect upon the many stories of this ancient earth, the ones from the First Nations and also from the nations that have joined us. Traditionally, Aboriginal people shared our stories through engravings, dance, song and spoken words, originally for our families and our clans. Now it's done in many different mediums of films, plays, words on a page and through our songs and so much more. It is important to keep the stories alive. We need to see them, we need to hear them, we need to be them, creating our joint history. Creativity and the truth of the stories enriches our lives to be shared and to be connected. This country and the truth. I welcome tonight's discussion. We've long valued creativity and culture in our communities. But our city's vibrancy is in its decay as rents have soared and housing in the inner city has become unaffordable, particularly for artists, for creatives and for the younger people. If we are to maintain a vibrant, diverse, accessible, inclusive city, we must address the lack of affordable housing. Otherwise, Sydney will become a soulless grotto for the rich. I fear that the history is repeating itself too. At its peak in the 1970s, Redfern and the surrounds were home to the Aboriginal community of around 35,000 people. Devastatingly, as a result of government policy, only about 1,000 odd remain today. We are all poorer for this. Don't live regretting what we should have done, but create the legacy of what must be done. As you connect, learn and share tonight, tomorrow and beyond. Don't lose sight of the important work that still needs to be done, bringing my people, your people and all our people together. Let there be our connection and let there be the emotions of this people, this country, of nature and the world around us and within us. Be that pulsation of care, love, compassion and inclusion for our collective future. All of us can make a positive change to each other, this city, this state and this country now and into the future. To make that future possible, let us all draw upon my people's spirits as we continue on our journey. May my people's spirits walk with you and guide you as we strive forward for us all. Again, on behalf of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, Ninyini, Nala, Wongan, Maori, Bajari, Gadi, Nurda, welcome to Gadigal land. This always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Yvonne, for that warm welcome and welcome real talk, I think setting the standard for what we're going to be discussing tonight. Our first speaker is Sydney's longest-serving mayor, Clover AO. Throughout her public life, Clover has been a champion of progressive policies, and Sydney has the credentials to lead and support change. A new City of Sydney cultural strategy has been drafted. I'm sure you're very keen to hear more. Please welcome to the stage the Lord Mayor of Sydney, Clover AO.
Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to our City Talk tonight on the future of Sydney's creative economy. I'd like to thank Yvonne for her welcome and also acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora and say that I respect the elders past and present. I also want to welcome Minister John Graham, Minister for Arts, Music and Nighttime Economy and many other portfolios. And I'd like to particularly welcome Justine Simons, OBE Deputy Mayor of London for Culture and Creative Industries. She's come all this way to talk to us tonight. I think that is absolutely fantastic. Yes, give her a big clap. She's also the founder and chair of the World Cities Cultural Forum. I'd also like to acknowledge councillors who are here tonight, our CEO Monica Baroni and our directors and our talented staff. We have Claudia Karvan here, who's an Australian actor and producer and my near neighbour in Redfern. And I'd like to acknowledge and thank Zan for emceeing tonight. We have a fabulous panel coming up and I'd like to really welcome them and also thank the performers who we'll hear from later on too. So, the City of Sydney invests about $34 million a year on art and culture, ranging from our New Year's Eve fireworks to art commissions to grants for local events. This helps to support the economy and close to 1,700 creative businesses in the city, and thousands more rely on them. It also provides Sydney artists with work, paid work. But no matter how much we invest in events, our creative economy will buckle if we can't provide artists, musicians, writers and performers with suitable places to work and live. The availability of affordable workspaces for creative industries is a critical issue facing the cultural life of urbanising global cities. Sydney, with one of the hottest property markets in the world, and where industrial buildings are routinely converted to apartment blocks, is hard hit by this loss. In the past 2 years, thousands of musicians, dancers, actors, writers and artists have rehearsed, produced and created their artworks at the City of Sydney's Creative Studios, just 2 blocks from here in Bathurst Street. In what was one of the city's most important acquisitions of creative space in years, we, and that is Graham Yarn, our Director of Planning at the City, negotiated with developer Greenland for the construction of the 5-storey, 2,000 square metre studio complex and for its acquisition for a peppercorn rent for 99 years for affordable cultural space in the heart of the city. Since then, we have had 6,700 bookings by artists and artists' organisations, and offices and visual arts studios have been occupied by 100% of the time. Such is the high demand for affordable creative workspaces. The studios have produced many local and national productions, from the Hayes Theatre Company's rollicking chamber musical, The Lucky Country, to Stephen Page's contemporary dance work, which premiered at the Adelaide Festival this year, to visual artist Deborah Kelly's creations, which toured the country. As part of our Creative City cultural policy, we've supported more than 80 creative tenancies, comprising 10,000 square metres of space, such as the Hayes Theatre in Potts Point, Eternity Playhouse in Darlinghurst, the Joynton Avenue Creative Centre in Green Square, and First Draft Gallery in Woolloomooloo. In 2022 and 2023, rental subsidies for cultural organisations using our spaces amounted to $3 million. This is a small but significant proportion of all creative workspace in Sydney. In fact, the city is the largest single provider of subsidised creative workspaces in Sydney, but much more is needed. We need more space for culture and art. In the 10 years to 2022, commercial floor space for creative industries has declined by 173,000 square metres in the City of Sydney alone, the equivalent of the space provided by more than 3 Sydney opera houses. Of that lost space, 14,400 square metres was once production space, occupied by artists, musicians, writers and performers. And while Greater Sydney still has the largest creative workforce in the country, Sydney is the only capital city to have lost creatives over the past 5 years. According to the 2021 census, the number of artists, musicians, writers and performers nationally rose by 17.9%, roughly in line with job growth. But in Greater Sydney it dropped by 11.6%. Every other capital city had an increase. This raises the prospect that Sydney will lose the ability to produce its own cultural products and will instead become an importer of culture made in Melbourne, Brisbane or overseas, and that's not what we can see happen, is it? There is a direct correlation between Sydney's housing affordability crisis and the acute and urgent demand for subsidised cultural spaces. Unless we make space for culture and creativity that is affordable and that provides creators with security of tenure, we risk losing the cultural vibrancy that makes Sydney globally competitive. As part of the city's long-term strategy, Sustainable Sydney 2030 to 2050, we set a target to generate an additional 40,000 square metres of creative floor space by 2036. We like setting targets because we always meet them. But the scale of the loss of creative spaces is too great for any of us to tackle alone. Governments at all levels need to urgently work together to retain, to rebuild, to restore creative spaces close to affordable housing. To this end, I've been working with Minister Graham on a bold new approach, the establishment of a Creative Land Trust. The Trust would be an independent, not-for-profit entity with a board of trustees that takes land out of the private market and places it in the hands of the cultural sector in perpetuity. And that's the music to your ears, it's in perpetuity. The Trust could build a portfolio from philanthropic and other private investors, and it can manage properties from the city and from other governments. Think of it as a real estate social enterprise. This approach requires buy-in from all levels of government and the private sector. Creative land trusts are used in other cities, including London, Austin and San Francisco, which we'll hear more about tonight. In addition, our new cultural strategy, 2025 to 2035, is focused on supporting artists. The strategy will commit an extra $20 million over 10 years, that's on top of what we are already spending, along with the establishment of the Creative Land Trust, and funding could go to artist fellowships, which could be up to 50 a year. So we are investing directly in retaining a diverse range of creators to produce work here in Sydney. We had a City Talk here about a decade ago, and some of you might have come to that too, and Neil Armfield was one of our speakers. And he talked about how important it was to look after the seed beds of culture. And this really resounded with us, and we've been doing that ever since, but we're taking it to another level now. There'll be 2 other grant programs in the policy, a grant to help retaining existing creative spaces, to upgrade venues and to meet compliance costs, and a Creative Spaces Startup grant to help new creatives meet startup costs and fit-outs. And among the many more important initiatives, the strategy will also have a planning advice service to help creatives navigate approval processes for venues and events. This is a strategy that will maintain the city's momentum in supporting and inspiring our creative communities, our seedbeds of culture. Once it's on exhibition, we will consult with the creative sector on how to shape and deliver these new investments. Our current policy, cultural policy, 2014 to 2014, has served us well. Over the past 10 years, we've elevated Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture and art so it is more visible and reflects that as the world's oldest continuous living culture, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture is the city's most unique and enduring asset. Through the City's Eora journey, which we established back in 2008, and Haiti Perkins has been our curator, we have committed $5.5 million on exceptional public works, from the site of the first contact on Sydney Harbour to the home of Aboriginal activism in Redfern, including Barra. And you can see Barra there. It's a 6.4 metre marble representation of a fishhook on the Tarpeian Way, just above the Opera House, just near Government House, and it represents the fishhooks that Barangaroo and her womenfolk used when they were fishing to provide food for their families. Our major cultural event, NAIDOC, in the city, and our economic development plan and our Aboriginal Knowledge and Cultural Centre, which we opened in the heart of Redfern just very recently, are also part of the Eora journey. We are investing $44 million to revitalise Chinatown and Haymarket, and we're developing a 24-hour cultural precinct focused on the warehouse spaces in North Alexandria, close to Green Square Station, and not near residents, so you'll be able to have loud music there all night. And since 2007, we've brought to life 26 laneways with bars, restaurants, shops and art installations, including the most recent tiled artworks by Callum Morton that frame and light up 3 fire exits in Market Row and Mullen Street. If you haven't seen them, check them out, they're beautiful. Of our 37 temporary art projects, the Barlow Street Forest by an art group called Dirt Witches is so well loved that it's been retained permanently. On Oxford Street, we're building on a cluster of creative businesses and art schools by allowing developers to increase building heights and floor space in return for more space for creative businesses and cultural venues. We provided seed funding for Qtopia, which tells the stories and honours the heroes of the LGBTIQA+ community, which is now established in the former notorious Darlinghurst Police Station. In addition, this year, and which I'm very pleased to tell you, was opened by the Prime Minister, the Premier and the Lord Mayor. In addition, this year we funded free entry on Sundays so more people can learn about the horrors that went on in Darlinghurst Police Station in the past in a bid to overcome prejudices that still exist today. The opening of Qtopia is a trigger for elevating the Taylor Square precinct into a major cultural destination. This could be achieved by relocating the courts and opening up the Darlinghurst courthouse complex for public and cultural uses, and we could open the National Arts School to Oxford Street and Taylor Square, connecting it to the wider precinct. So in conclusion, I want to say, art is an essential part of life, and artists are our essential workers. Let's work together, governments, corporates and creative workers, to retain what we've got, to rebuild and restore what we've lost, and to reimagine Sydney as a haven for creative industries, for working artists and for cultural tourism, now and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And fittingly, our next speaker is the Honourable John Graham, MLC, Special Minister of State, Minister for Roads, Minister for the Arts, start walking, there's lots to get through, Minister for Music and the Nighttime Economy, and Minister for Jobs and Tourism. I do say that with the greatest of respect. Too casual, Zan. He is committed to supporting vibrant and inclusive cultural industries, economies and creative cities. Give him a very warm and very respectful welcome to the stage to Minister Graham.
Thanks so much, Zan. I thought that was just about the right amount of casual myself. I do want to thank Yvonne Weldon for that welcome to country, and I too pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. The connection to country that Yvonne spoke of is a reminder of tens of thousands of years of creativity that has taken place on this land. And that is an inspiration to fight for creativity in today's society, with all of the financial pressures and the competition for space that you've just heard about. Tonight, I'd of course also like to acknowledge the Lord Mayor Clover Moore, the incredible lineup of speakers that you've got tonight. You're very lucky to have this group assembled. In particular, I'd like to welcome Justine Simons from the City of London, and I'd also like to acknowledge councillors, including Councillor Linda Scott and her national local government role. Justine's experience in London and through the World Cities Cultural Forum is so relevant for us here in Sydney because we are facing a global problem, and that is land scarcity, population growth and gentrification, pricing young people, creatives and creative space out of our great cities. New York, London, San Francisco, we're not the only community facing this problem, but it is particularly bad here. We're a fast-growing city with one of the most unaffordable property markets in the world, which is why we're losing our young people faster than any other Australian city. When house prices relative to incomes almost triple over the course of one generation, it's no wonder that Sydney is leading the way in net negative domestic migration. And it's no wonder that people in their 30s are driving that trend. The New South Wales Productivity Commissioner warned this: Sydney risks becoming a city without grandchildren. We simply do need to build more homes near transport, near jobs, near our family and our friends, but also near our cultural and creative communities. We have to find and make space for creatives in our growing communities. And that's where the role of government, the role of council is vital, and I certainly regard that as one of the most important challenges in my role as Minister. As we rebuild a better, more affordable, more connected Sydney, we need to fight for creative spaces within our communities. That is a key objective in the government's Creative Communities policy, to activate spaces so that our creative communities have the studios, rehearsal spaces, performance spaces, production facilities, the exhibition space, places to gather and work and perform, places for our creative communities to be able to call home. That's what's needed. That's why we've unlocked the old White Bay power station for the Biennale. It's a fantastic site. It's why we're working towards a new world-class film facility at Callan Park. It's why we've worked with the city to support Queer History Museum Qtopia opening in the old Darlinghurst Police Station. That ambition to back our creative communities is a part of the motivation for our vibrancy reforms that are clearing the red tape, the licensing laws and the noise complaints that have hammered our live music venues for too long, and that's starting to work. In just over a year in government, I can report the number of registered venues playing live music has doubled, and I can report the era of single neighbour noise complaints shutting down venues is coming to an end in New South Wales. The need to activate more creative and cultural spaces is also why we're looking for new ideas and models, like creative land trusts. This is a model that's working in other cities, including London, Toronto, Austin and San Francisco. Each city does it differently and at a different scale. You'll hear tonight about London. It has funding from government and Bloomberg Philanthropies. The Trust is a not-for-profit landholding entity that owns buildings and creative spaces to be available on a long-term, affordable basis for creative purposes. Too often, the only spaces creatives can afford are short-term leases in buildings about to be redeveloped. A creative land trust could hold creative space in perpetuity for future artists, our children and grandchildren. As well as a vehicle for owning the property, it provides a legal vehicle to access finance, philanthropic funding and property donation, and it allows different levels of government to work together. And that is why tonight I'm very happy to be here with Lord Mayor Clover announcing this partnership between the City of Sydney and the New South Wales Government to examine the prospect of setting up a creative land trust here in Sydney. If the model stacks up, a suitable property from the New South Wales Government and one from the City of Sydney will be identified to set up the trust. I'm very excited to see where this takes us, and I'm excited to learn more about how it's working in London from Justine Simons. I don't accept a future for Sydney without grandchildren. I don't accept the future for Sydney where creatives are forced out due to cost pressures. We do want to build homes and we do want to grow our creative communities and industries. We can have both. To do that, we need to make space for creativity and all that it brings. The innovation, the entertainment, the productivity, the bold visions, the expression of who we are, and of course, the fun. What city could afford to lose that? Thank you very much. Have a great night.
Thank you, Minister Graham. So, how do these pillars flourish in the real world? This is the question on everyone's lips. Here to tell us more about the first pillar through song, the right to culture, is ARIA award-winning artist and absolute legend. Please make him welcome. It's Dan Sultan.
Hello, everyone. Hello. I was originally going to stand there and say a few things, but then I noticed it was running a little bit late, and I was a bit nervous about doing that. So I'm going to say a few less things over here while holding my safety blanket, my guitar, I should say. It's wonderful to be here tonight, and when I was asked to say a few words, I can only ever speak, and I think I should only ever speak for myself as an individual. And so that's what I'll do. And I feel like creativity is such an important thing in the universe. It certainly is in my little universe. And creativity and positivity always reaches a lot further than destruction or negativity in them. That's how I've always tried to do things. For example, I don't really believe in tearing down statues of oppressors. I understand where a lot of these people are coming from, and I agree with a lot of where they're coming from. But I personally believe in creating new plaques for these statues, to tell the whole story, to clarify history, and to never ever forget the history. Every time I've been attacked by bigots, online or in person, I don't take screenshots and I don't share it on my social media. What I do is I sit down with a pen and paper and my guitar, and I make something that I feel is beautiful out of something so ugly as that. And that's how I approach my creativity. And I feel very fortunate to be in a place like this tonight, to be able to sing for you and show you what I mean. I also want to thank Auntie Yvonne for that welcome, and thank her and her whole family, past, present and emerging, for having us all here tonight. Here's a song called Story, and it's about the first time I remember finding out what racism was. It's a chirpy little number. There's a note on my door. We don't want you around. And I felt the fear the first time that I found out, and I was just a boy. And I carry the weight. And now that I'm older, it still sits on my shoulders. Oh, you tell me to cast it away. Tell me how I'm meant to feel. Tell me my past and my shame isn't real. Oh, now you're entitled to think what you like. It's true. This story is mine. Now you broadcast your words down your microphone, designed to remind them that this ain't my home anymore. But I know who I am, my blood to the core, and I'll tell my children
and you tell me how I'm meant to feel. You tell me my past and my shame isn't real. You're entitled to think what you like is true. This story is mine. You're entitled to think what you like is true. This story is mine. It's true. Well, this story is mine. It's true. True. This story is mine. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here. See you later.
Everyone, that was amazing. What a voice and what a way to use it. Thank you, Dan. Our next guest is one of Australia's most acclaimed actors and producers. Claudia Karvan has starred in everything from The Secret Life of Us to The Heartbreak Kid, Love My Way, and of course, Bump. She's at as home on a theatre stage as she is Dancing with the Stars. And as a producer, Claudia has been behind some of the most successful television here in Australia, much of it set and filmed here in Sydney. She's an award winner and an Order of Australia holder, and here to chat about how Sydney has and hopefully will continue to feed her creative spirit. Please welcome to the stage, Claudia Karvan OAM. Oh, hi.
Hello.
I didn't see you sneaking up there behind me. Claudia, you grew up in the thick of Sydney City in King's Cross. Culturally, how have you seen the city of Sydney, and I guess even Greater Sydney, change from being a little kid in the Cross to today? Small question.
Tonight there are quite a few bleak statistics, but the really positive cultural change I've seen in my lifetime is First Nations voices. So many more writers, directors, actors, musicians, artists, and a lot of that came down to things like the ABC Indigenous Unit and the Screen Australia. So it's a real clear reflection that policy can work. And I know that's what we're talking about tonight, are policy dreams that we really hope will get backed, and they can work. So that's one of the biggest changes I've seen, which is really positive. Other changes have been, it feels it's like it's got a lot safer. It feels like there's not a lot of space for risk. And I guess that is to do with cost of living pressures and housing affordability.
So safer is a negative, not a positive?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Because you want the risky voices, and you want the diverse voices, bigger, broad demographic. You don't want people filtering themselves. You want the subversive voices. They're the ones I'm attracted to anyway.
You've become a great enabler in, bringing other people's stories, championing other people's stories on the screen, often starring in these shows, but really being behind them in producing and co-writing in cases as well. What do you love about, creating in Sydney and specifically telling Sydney stories on screen?
Well, the majority of the time I used to work in Melbourne, and everyone thought I was a Melbourne person. I'm like, no, I am so Sydney. I'm born and bred Sydney, raised in King's Cross. And so once I had kids, I co-created Love My Way here because I wanted to be in my hometown. And there's so much cross-pollination of ideas with artists. So a lot of my friends are musicians and painters, and that all goes into the TV series. All those, I'm like a magpie or a bowerbird. We all share our inspirations and our stories, and that's what the creative process is. So Love My Way happened here, and then Bump, more recently, I start shooting the 5th series of Bump in 2 weeks, and that's very much Sydney's story. It's inner west, and it's, lots of diverse faces and a lot of different voices. So I feel I'm very privileged to be working here. It is expensive. City of Sydney, we pay double the rates for this council to work here. Like the permits, it's so expensive compared to other councils. I'm just going to say that now.
She's got the stage.
Can I get mates' rates? Because I'm a rate payer.
This is the real talk we're here for tonight, though. We've got to talk about it all.
Well, these are the obstacles because, our budget's not big. We can't afford to build studios. Bump has travelled all around the world. It's very unusual for a series to be running into its 5th series, and it's very popular on the BBC. It's sold all around the world, and that's because it is very specific storytelling. It is rooted very much in our community, and it is distinctively a Sydney inner west world that we've created.
Yeah, which really speaks to that importance of continuing that storytelling, because it can translate and it can be celebrated right anywhere around the world.
I think, the more specific it is, the more authentic it is. And that is to do with being a part of a creative community, and so that we're not all siloed and we're not all being pushed out, 2-hour commute to, see your art, your friends.
Yeah. Okay, so what are some of the, the barriers that you're facing? You mentioned the rates there, the council rates, but as a creator across the board, what are the barriers that you're seeing, and what would you really love, blue sky thinking, that's what we're here for, to change?
I think our industry is still remaining stubbornly quite white. That's an obstacle. And I think spaces, like writing spaces, because people are really living in smaller and smaller places with a lot more financial responsibilities, and they need space to create. And that's all spaces, so studio spaces, big raw spaces, spaces like Parramatta Studios is a very good example, a good reference that a lot of my painting friends have recommended. Like if there's something like that we can set up in the City of Sydney, would be great. What other obstacles? Blue sky thinking, like production offices for, Canal Road is a very good resource for our industry, but we need more like medium-sized studio spaces, because something like Disney or George Miller gets a lot of support, but we need sort of middle-sized support for shows like ours, and to tell sort of grassroots stories.
Yeah, I think this is something that we're going to come up through the panel discussion as well, that beginning, the middle, and of course those big players. Everyone matters across that line, but you can't actually get to the end point unless you support the beginning and keep that support running through the middle. Claudia, thank you so much for sharing some of your brief experiences as a Sydney-sider through and through. Please give it up for the wonderful Claudia Karvan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Claudia. Just a reminder too that you can scan the Slido QR code, which is just behind me here on the screen. Get ready to send those questions to the panel. We'll be digging into that very, very soon. Tonight, as you've heard, we are incredibly lucky to hear from a global expert on culture and the creative industries, Justine Simons, OBE. She is the Deputy Mayor, Culture and Creative Industries in London. She founded and is chair of the World Cities Culture Forum, the principal leadership network on culture and the future of cities, which has now grown to over 40 global cities, reaching across 6 continents. Justine has flown here from London for this talk to tell us more about the challenges and, importantly, the solutions facing many cities around the world, and to help us understand Cultural Pillar 3, creative spaces. Please give a very big Sydney welcome to Justine Simons, OBE.
Oops. Thank you so much. It is a real privilege to be here today. Thank you so much to Clover for such a fabulous invitation. So I wanted to start tonight by posing quite a difficult question, which is, are cities killing creativity? And I think to answer it, we have to start with the big picture and ask, what does today's world actually look like? Well, as you all know, the world is a complicated place and it's changing at lightning speed. Our climate's in crisis. There's racism, war, and mass migration. AI is the great unknown. And although our world is smarter and more connected, social media is causing anxiety, and people are lonely. So all these things are transforming the world as we know it. Experts have a word for it. They call it the permacrisis. So as we face these very deep challenges, a legitimate question I think all of us need to ask is, where does culture fit in this picture? Well, the fact is, culture does not exist in a bubble. It's woven into our lives, our cities, our politics, and our communities. And it can play a much deeper role across the whole of our society. And there's a growing understanding of this all around the world. I'm the founder of the World Cities Culture Forum, which is a leadership network of 45 global cities spanning 6 continents. This is us. From Paris to Kyiv, Sao Paulo to Los Angeles, Sydney to London. We are civic leaders on a mission to build a world where culture is a golden thread at the heart of thriving cities. Imagine a global relay race where we pass the best ideas around the world like batons, each city improving the idea as they go. But why are we on this mission? Because we know that creativity is a major untapped resource. We're all sitting on a gold mine that we just need to unlock. Because too often this has been the story of culture. Right there at the bottom of the list. Vulnerable when budgets get cut. But this is the real story. That culture can make a difference across all aspects of society. And around the world, we're seeing the value of culture shifting. Culture has gone from a niche to a mainstream idea. In London, 1 in every 5 jobs is a creative one. And the creative economy is generating over £50 billion a year for us, which is over 100 billion Australian dollars. But as the saying goes, not everything that counts can be counted. And culture's doing so much more. Dance is reducing dementia. Opera is helping to rebuild COVID-damaged lungs. Culture is revitalizing neighborhoods, building civic pride, and dare I say it, hope. But despite all of this, we can't take culture for granted. Because culture's also fragile. Funding is under pressure. Politically, it's challenging too. There are no votes in culture. Despite how much we value it, when it comes to elections, people understandably want their leaders to solve crime and fix housing. Life as a creative is tough as well. Space is expensive, and forging a creative career needs grit, determination, and the ability to never give up hope. But the good news is, there is hope. Despite the myriad pressures, cities are not, in fact, killing creativity. Many are mobilizing to protect it. In my own city, we're on this journey ourselves. So I'd like to share the London Creative Space story with you today. Our 2 watchwords are hardwire and future-proof. Hardwiring creativity into the system and future-proofing it so that we can remain a creative capital long into the future. Now, we don't have large budgets or a lot of power at City Hall in London, so I describe our work as acupuncture. Finding that sweet spot where City Hall has the power to create the change that's needed. But that's an abstract concept, so what does it mean in practical terms? I'd love to share quickly 5 practical ways that we are future-proofing London as a creative capital. So, number 1, I describe as data and jeopardy. Over a decade ago, we began to hear of more and more creative spaces struggling. So we commissioned some data to find out what was really going on. Looking at the data back then, we learned that over the last decade, we lost 50% of nightclubs, 40% of music venues, and 30% of creative workspaces. It's like we discovered an iceberg. Below the waterline, there were some really major challenges. But data alone wasn't enough. We needed people to care, to understand what was at stake here. So, as well as the data, we also needed to convey the jeopardy, to tell the story of how vital these small grassroots spaces are to our city, how they are the incubators for the next generation of artists, musicians, and DJs, why we need all these specialist skills, the photographers, the designers, the set builders, and how together this workforce is holding up this economic powerhouse that is generating billions for London. And it's also the reason that 4 out of 5 tourists come to visit our city. And now that we have the data, we know where all our creative spaces are. We can protect them through our planning system, which I believe is our secret superpower. So this is number 2, planning, the secret superpower. So the Mayor's London Plan has now a whole chapter on culture for the very first time, formally protecting artists' workspaces, grassroots music venues and nightclubs. And we've also developed the first cultural infrastructure plan. Because just as we plan for schools and housing and roads, we also need to plan for culture. Another new experiment, number 3, is creative enterprise zones. These disrupt the market cycle and help creators to put down roots in areas of London. They're protected zones through the planning system with low-cost space in the long term. And the good news is the experiment's working. We've now got 12 zones all across London, and between them, they're on course to deliver 72,000 square metres of affordable long-term creative workspace, which is the equivalent of 10 UK football pitches. Another experiment, you've heard a bit about this, is the Creative Land Trust. This is number 4, and as you've heard, it's a social investment model. The trust buys property to use as low-cost studios. And again, these are permanent, not temporary. But all these things, they're long-term solutions. This is the hard-wiring stuff. But what we couldn't ignore was the immediate issues. So we set up a Culture at Risk office at City Hall, which I like to call the Bat Phone. And it's a helpline for creative organisations who are in trouble. It might be licensing, it might be issues with their landlord, it might be grant funding, all kinds of issues. And it's helped over 1,500 cases so far since 2020. So finally, what are we learning on this journey? First, we learned that joining forces is powerful. Industry, philanthropy, and creatives are coming together to protect and grow creativity. And that political leadership is an essential ingredient too. I'm really lucky that our London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, has backed culture so wholeheartedly. He's made it a top priority, and he's the first mayor to have done that in London. And I must congratulate Clover on your leadership and long-standing commitment to culture. And of course, your team, the vision and determination of Lisa Colley, especially as you launch your ambitious strategy. Second and finally, we learned that we have to get out of our bubble. That is essential, because we're not alone. Our global relay race of good ideas is picking up speed. London's Bat Phone has now been adopted by the Mayor of New York. Our Creative Land Trust was based on an idea developed by San Francisco and is now being improved upon by Sydney, with Austin and Vancouver looking at how they will also establish their own versions of creative land trusts. So together, we're a really powerful force for change. Because to return to where I started, the world in the 21st century is full of complex challenges. So to solve them, we must adapt to this complexity. And culture can do this. Culture can be the catalyst for positive change at a personal, a city, and a global level. But it can't be taken for granted. So it's the collective task of all of us to unlock the power of creativity in our cities. As Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, we must fight for the things we care about, but do it in a way that leads others to join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Justine. And what a perfect keynote to fire up our discussion tonight. We want your questions now, so please scan the Slido QR code on the screen and send your questions to the panel, who are all making their way up here right now. I'll ask you to hold your applause until I finish introducing them all. Joining Justine Simons, OBE, Marcus Westbury, OAM, who's the CEO and co-founder of FB Ideas, an internationally recognised, I said hold that applause, urbanist, he does deserve it though, and social innovator working at the intersection of cities, culture, innovation, place and creativity. Alex Schumann, who's the CEO of Carla Zampatti Fashion and board member with the Australian Fashion Council. His career spans economics, investment banking and government. Sarah Mansour, who's the co-founder and executive director of the Bankstown Poetry Slam, and former chair of the Artists Advisory Panel to the New South Wales Arts and Culture Minister. Please welcome Darren Dale, who's the managing director and producer at Blackfella Films, board chair of Sydney Film Festival. What are you doing here tonight, Darren? And producer of dramas including Total Control and Redfern Now. And we also have Morgan Harris, who is the co-chair of the City of Sydney Cultural and Creative Sector Advisory Panel and director of Tortuga Studios, which is a cultural production space. Please make them all welcome. So my first question is, what is culture? And why is it important to Sydney? Darren.
Oh, me, okay. That wasn't planned. It's so great hearing Justine speak. It's so inspiring to see what cities can do. And I think I step back and think, what is culture? And I think it's something that's deeply important and that we should all value. But I think about how do we value it? And I think that's the moment that we're in. How do we really turn our minds and look at the great things that come out of culture? And for me, in my life, it's had a profound effect. I've got to tell my people's stories, and I've got to be part of making our stories part of the mainstream. And I think that, Claudia talked about that. She's seen a change in First Nations storytelling. And that was because people decided that this thing that is so special, and it's not just Aboriginal people's culture, it's our culture as Australians. And I think that's important. And you saw the valuing of that culture, and then what followed was that people supported that. And then what happened is you see the success stories like a Warwick Thornton and winning a big prize at Cannes. And I think you create aspiration and you suddenly go, if I can see it, I can be it. And I think that is the profound moment for me, that I've been part of a change. But I think we're at a moment in the most anxious of times where I think that value and culture will give us so much more back. So I would say to everyone out here, encourage young people. And it's not just creators, I think. It's not just culture makers, but it's actually valuing it so everyone can participate in it.
Speaking of valuing it, Alex, I'm kind of curious about your perspective on culture, because fashion is something that some people see as a cultural art form and other people see as just the stuff that we buy down the shops.
Look, I'd throw it out there that I think these days really fashion is really one of the highest cultural moments. I think when my mother started Colours and Patty in the 60s, fashion wasn't seen as a creative industry, and I think the business of fashion was sort of seen as not really business. It was sort of seen as folly or frippery. These days, the biggest art exhibitions in the country that we see might go to National Gallery of Victoria. They're all art exhibitions. It'll be Alexander McQueen. the second richest man in the world is a fashion and cultural entrepreneur. It's such a different cultural environment that we really define culture much more broadly than performance art and wall art. It's really, these days, I think, much more fashion and other cultural industries.
Can I just, get someone to open up the Slido because the passcode's on, even though it wasn't supposed to be? Sorry to interrupt, I can't access your questions. If someone could come up and just type in that passcode, that would be great. It's fine. I think that one of the big announcements that we heard tonight, H, is about creative spaces and the importance of those, and of course the work that the City of Sydney, in consultation with the government, is hopefully going to do to protect those spaces. When we talk about creative spaces, what does that actually mean in real world terms?
Well, that's a big question. A creative space, they're multifaceted. There's a multitude of them, and it depends on the end user. They could be a pop-up gallery, or they could be a ceramic studio, and it really depends on who's using it. But in terms of the loss of spaces, it's very often production spaces that have been lost, and they are the ones that are dirty and noisy, and they're obviously not seen in the same way. They're not beautiful. They're often quite hidden. And I'm very much at the coalface of that. I run a big production space in the inner west, and it's been going for 15 years, and we've got 23 creative businesses there at the moment. And we operate out of an old brick factory in St. Peter's, and it's over 100 years old, and it leaks, and it's freezing cold, and it's always dirty, but it's full of the most incredible talent. And I think sometimes there needs to be some recognition of these weird and wonderful spaces that are hidden behind rusty roller doors, and people don't know what they are, and therefore they're overlooked. And I think that particularly these sort of bigger spaces, they're very collaborative, they're very adaptive, and they're part of a really rich network. And so by identifying them and championing them, we're recognising that the impact they have on our cultural infrastructure. I think that's really vital.
Yeah, I mean, you've been, yes. Sorry, I don't know if I made that clear, but I can't actually access the Slido. Could someone from City of Sydney open up the iPad for me, please? Thanks. Marcus, you have a lot of experience in this area. Obviously, your work in Newcastle many years ago, but more recently at the helm of the Collingwood Yards project in Melbourne, which made use of a space that many people in Melbourne really didn't understand was a space that was up for grabs. Can you sort of speak to that experience of the opportunities that certain zoning and protecting of spaces can have in a city like Sydney?
Firstly, I was hoping that someone would just read out the master password for the city of Sydney so we
can
all know what it
frame.
was. That could have been useful. No, look, I've worked at both ends of the spectrum. So from temporary space through to, Collingwood Yards was former TAFE. The Victorian government decided in about 2008, 2009 that it would be an arts precinct and didn't quite know what that meant. And then it took a decade or so to basically turn it into a version of the Lands Trust that we've talked about tonight, which is a space that is preserved in perpetuity by the planning scheme as a space for artists and creative enterprises. So, what's interesting is that in order to create a lot of creative activity is seen as being shiny and glossy and the pretty outcomes you get at the end. But the reality is that culture is kind of messy and dirty and ugly, and you need people to make things. Culture is something that you create, not something that we just consume. And so any place that is going to be a vibrant creative place needs that whole ecosystem. It needs places where you can start things, places you can grow things, and then at the end, beautiful places to show off the best and greatest of all of it. The reality is that if you're trying to do something small, if you're starting out, what very low barriers potentially to the commercial sector are huge. Like the cost of renting space, the cost of compliance, the cost of working out what you're allowed to do and what permissions you need, and those sorts of things are incredibly difficult to navigate your way through if you're a creative practitioner. And any cultural policy has to think and work at all of those levels.
When you talk about cost of compliance, what do you actually mean? What's the nuts and bolts of that? If someone's trying to work in a creative space, what are the hurdles they need to jump over?
So if I'm a commercial practitioner and I want to start a business and I want to know whether I can get a permit to do X, Y, or Z, I just pay a lawyer and a bunch of planning consultants, and they just, they either tell me I can do it or they tell me they'll argue it in court if I get caught. If you're an artist with limited resources, the basic question of what am I allowed to do is huge. Can I make something here? A really basic question. When we started Renew Newcastle, which was a decade and a half ago, actually John Graham was working in the Premier's office at the time and managed to put us in touch with the Department of Planning to just give us some really basic guidelines on what we were allowed to claim. We were borrowing all these empty buildings in Newcastle. A gallery under the planning scheme is either a place that holds 3,000 people and needs to have 15 emergency exits, or it's a shop with art on the wall. And if you don't understand your way through the system, that complexity will knock you over at the first hurdle. So space needs to be cheap, but the bat phone idea, I need someone to shepherd me through this problem, is incredibly important for artists and people trying to start a creative practice.
Sarah, how does that apply to your experience in Western Sydney? I guess specifically talking about the infrastructure that's set up there or not set up there, and how you kind of navigate those spaces, be it a 3,000 capacity venue for a poetry slam or a smaller venue for an artist that isn't quite there yet but needs access and wants to create or consume culture.
I actually don't think that there's a 3,000 capacity venue in Western Sydney, unless I'm mistaken. And that's the problem. There's a real lack of cultural infrastructure in Western Sydney, and I think the statistic is in the last decade, if you're excluding Powerhouse Parramatta, only 3.5% of funding for cultural infrastructure has been allocated to Western Sydney as opposed to the rest of Sydney. And that shows because we know we've been running the Bankstown Poetry Slam out of the Bankstown Arts Centre for the last 11 years, and we outgrew that venue 10 years ago. We haven't been able to move anywhere else because the largest fit-for-purpose theatre space in Bankstown, in the city of Bankstown, which is home to hundreds of thousands of people, is a 300 seat theatre. And if you don't want to host your event at a wedding venue, then you don't have any other options. And it speaks to a real issue for people wanting to start out, and then also, of course, that mid-tier that we're talking about and the larger organisations, because there is a real desire to engage, and there are all of these stereotypes about people from Western Sydney, that they're not engaged with culture and they're not creators and they're not consumers, but we're actually some of the biggest consumers of culture, and we have so much to offer and so much to give as well. But if you don't have these spaces, you don't have people accessing them, you don't have people understanding that they can be part of this ecosystem, and so you're inevitably kind of blocking people off from even entertaining the idea of entering this space just by not having the actual physical infrastructure there.
Yeah, someone's actually got a question through the Slido asking a question specifically about Western Sydney artists and how we ensure cultural support where the councils don't have the same resources the City of Sydney does. From your experience, how do you navigate that? Is it DIY?
It's so DIY, and when I started out with the Bankstown Poetry Slam, I was studying law, doing my law degree, and so we just had to teach ourselves how to manage stakeholder relations, how to apply for grants, how to, put on an event, do production, do a run sheet, do all these things, and really it's just been, there wasn't any of that guidance and support for us. That's been my personal experience. So really, I think what we need are some incubators, some cultural hubs where artists and creatives can go and get that support, learn from others. And I think there's a real desire for people that are from Western Sydney to stay in Western Sydney, People want to live and work in the same place. And so for some reason, there's been this stigma about Western Sydney, but actually people from Western Sydney love Western Sydney, and Darren and I are both from Western Sydney, and that's something that we bonded over. And we want to stay in Western Sydney, we want to stay creating in Western Sydney, and there needs to be a whole of government approach to this, but also, the corporate sector can do a lot more in supporting that as well.
I'm kind of curious about where the London approach has come into this, because obviously London is a city of many villages, many different boroughs, and many different cultural backgrounds. And how do you sort of spread the love, particularly with this new plan that you've been executing over the last few years, to ensure that there is support from the beginning through to the middle to, the higher tier artists across the board? How do you tackle that?
Yeah, I think multifaceted. I think we have a set of values and principles. We're interested in levelling the playing field. We're interested in addressing inequality. All those kind of ideas thread through everything. So just to take one example that I spoke about, which is the creative enterprise zones. So they are planning designations. So they're zones in London, and they have their own personality. So they're not kind of just randomly designed. So there might be one where there's a lot of artist studios, and that's the focus, or film studios, and that's the focus, or music. And one of the great things about them is they do build a sense of community. So everyone is in this zone, even though it's a planning thing, there is built this sense of community around it. And we've deliberately designed them to be very porous. So one of the challenges we have, and I think you have it here too, is how do you get young people into these creative jobs? The creative industry is notoriously built on nepotism, who you know, how you get your jobs. So the zones are acting kind of to break down nepotism at local level. So where we've got skills money and grants, we've funneled it through the creative enterprise zones. So when young people in those areas get the skills training, connect with those small creative businesses, those artist studios, when the jobs come up, they're already familiar, they've already got the relationships, they've already been to the events. So they're acting as these kind of agents of change as well on the ground. So I think what we're trying to do is make these things work really hard for us, do lots of different things. And one of the other challenges they've really helped with is, if you're government, one of the hardest things for you to do is to reach individual creatives. You're just not built for it. Government is built to deal with big institutions and big procurement, etc. And this was a real issue during the pandemic because of course, freelancers and small businesses were the hardest hit in the pandemic. Now, our creative industries is 99% freelancers and small creative businesses, and that's over 1 million people. So we were all sitting there going, how do we reach the people we know we need to reach? Where are they? And actually using the creative enterprise zones to funnel funding through to grassroots creative communities was really effective, and we were able to bring in kind of greening money, skills money, recovery money, emergency money, arts money into them. And we just did a study that showed that creative businesses within our zones grew by 22% since the pandemic. And if you were outside a zone, your business on average dropped by -4%. So this idea of kind of joining the thing together, making it work harder, bringing people together, I think really adds value. It's great. It's definitely greater than some of its parts. And even though it is a really technical planning designation, we're really working it hard.
And I love that idea, Justine. I think, and I am a proud Bankstown boy, and it is one thing that Sarah and I connected over. What's interesting to know is I'm probably 25 years older than you, but the same challenges still exist in terms of access and seeing the creative industries as a viable option. And I love, Justine, that idea of breaking down anything that we can do, I think, to remove barriers to access and participation, because that's what it's about, right? We need more people to participate. We need our creative industries to look more like when you walk down the street. And I speak very personally about the film industry, but we're still not a very diverse industry. The stories that we make, like Claudia Karvan, incredibly talented creative, and yes, she pursues diversity, but that's one great creator doing that. We've done it in shows like Red for Now or Total Control. Deborah Malman, who would have thought that she had never had been a leading lady in a television series, you know? And that is, you know, 20 years into my career, you get to have that gift to say we've proven we can do it. But I think anything that removes the barriers to access, that's something that I think is really worth pursuing. And I think, you know, I think we're very lucky to have a minister that is so committed to listening and hearing from the creatives that work in our industry. And I think with, you know, the Lord Mayor, I think this Creative Lands Trust could be something that could really enrich us, you know, really set a course. And I think we've got such momentum at the moment. Like, you know, I'm the new chair of the Sydney Film Festival. People have come together in their droves to be together, to commune and have a shared experience. And I think key to that shared experience is new voices, because new voices help us understand the most difficult of times and offer us new solutions. And I think, you know, these new solutions that, you know, collectively we can all explore seem terribly exciting, and it feels like we should supercharge them, and we should do everything that we can muster to try and get behind and make it happen quicker, because I think the time is right now.
Mm-hmm. I think also that in terms of the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're allowed to clap. Sorry, I hope I didn't scare anyone before.
I think the idea of the creative enterprise zone is really interesting as well, because I think that it doesn't exist in a planning capacity yet, but these spaces already exist and the areas that exist. And I can only speak from my experience, but the Inner West has multiple areas that already act like creative enterprise zones. They just need more funding, and they need the security of tenure for the creatives that are there. And they need to be protected, and a Creative Land Trust could potentially do that, I think. But the collaboration and the connection, it's already there. And it's just about identifying it and teaching people how to access it, I think.
I really loved Justine's point about, you know, the narrative of the iceberg, because I think what we've got, at least in the eastern city, perhaps not in Bankstown, is some of the shiniest brand new cultural exhibition spaces you've ever seen. It's amazing. But we really just don't have the content, the domestic content to put in those spaces. I think too often state governments, particularly this is the Victorian model, buy in offshore content to put it in there. It's Alexander McQueen, it's Taylor Swift or something like that. We don't really think about Australian creatives to insert into those. But it's because we've neglected the grassroots of the sorts of things that, you know, we need to create these hubs, of these cultural creative hubs, so that they can innovate, risk take, as Claudia was saying, but also just develop a network and cross-collaborate. They're the absolute grassroots of the industry. It just doesn't exist. I mean, at least in film, there's subsidies given to the film industry. There's no subsidies given to the fashion industry, and the fashion industry is one that has an enormous employment base, enormous amounts of exports. I would say it's the biggest cultural export that Australia has, whether it's Billabong or Rip Curl or Zimmerman. They all are huge national cultural export industries, but it doesn't have any financial support. It wouldn't be, I'm not here asking for financial support for the industry. I'm saying, though, that we need more opportunities to celebrate, recognise and showcase to the world, and use that as cultural content to fill the museums, not just offshore designers.
The only thing I would say, Alex, just about subsidy for films, I think that every Australian, though, deserves to be able to see themselves on screen. And I think we're in a converged world where, if we don't support new voices and telling of those stories, we could have a diet of stories that aren't necessarily seeing ourselves. So I think, yes, of course our industry is subsidised, but I think every Australian deserves to see their stories on screen. And then to grow and participate at the highest level. Like, I think we punch way above our weight. Like, look at Kate Blanchett, look at, all the actors that NIDA's produced. That's in New South Wales, that's a national training institution. It's the 14th best in the world, and we export ourselves to the world. So, I think subsidy isn't a dirty word, but I think that we do have an entitlement to see ourselves on screens.
This is an amazing segue into what I want to talk about next, because I think that it's not super overt, but I think there's a general underlying thing of there's this much pie and how much can go around, whether it's private funding or whether it is public money. And of course, there's less money going around with the cost of living crisis. If you're thinking about competition, which is real in the arts, isn't it? Because everyone's fighting for the same amount of money, public or private. Can that collaboration or competition turn into collaboration, Alex? Is collaboration something that we should be striving for?
I think the arts and the creative industries are inherently collaborative. You know, most of the fashion businesses in Sydney, or in Australia, are actually centred in Western Sydney, and the collaboration, it's the sharing of skills, markets, you know, international buyers. You know, they're all on the same journey together. It's and really what Darren was saying, if you can see it, you can do it. The inspiration that some brands like Zimmerman have provided to the rest of the industry are just profound. And so it's rolled out the red carpet for everybody else to follow that and really become export powerhouses. You can see so much Australian fashion in Selfridges in London. You'd see a dozen different brands on level 3 in Selfridges, Australian brands. There's just not a sense of competition within the industry in the what you'd see in law or banking or anything like that. It really is very collaborative. And it's also the cross-collaboration between different creative industries. You know, we did a creative collaboration last year with Lindy Lee, who's a painter and a sculptor. She's an astonishing creative talent, but you know, there's so much cross-pollination and excitement and energy and innovation that comes from that.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in your perspective on this, Marcus, because obviously you've, you know, been working in so many different projects. Literally your job is bringing people together from all walks of life. What are some of the kind of unexpected ways that you've seen collaboration thrive?
Oh, look, I've seen all sorts of collaboration, and I think creative people inherently want to support each other, and if we look at arts through the prism of like a funding model, then there will always be like a narrow door that everyone's fighting to push their way through. If you look at arts and creativity through the prism of like fertile ground where lots of people are planting lots of seeds, the rich ecology that grows out of that is fantastic. You put, you know, Renew Newcastle was a project where we just put a lot of people into spaces that no one was using, working near each other, and suddenly they were all collaborating. You know, that person was referring, the person who had the publishing business was like commissioning the photographer and working with the designer, and they were all growing their networks and their businesses together. And this is in a regional city. You know, like I think Collingwood Yard, similarly, by bringing a whole bunch of small to medium-sized arts organisations and individual artists under one roof, they instantly start identifying opportunities to work together and make things happen that would not have been there before. But in order to encourage collaboration, you've got to create an environment that is not about competing for the same little slice of scarce resources, and is instead about creating opportunities for people to come together physically or, you know, sort of through networks to actually make things happen together.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about also that idea of creating something without an end goal in the best of ways. Like art is not just about the thing that you make for someone to consume.
It's not
right?
a product.
It's about the art of creating. And I mean, for you who works in creative spaces all the time, have you seen that, you know, the value of collaboration beyond that tangible end result?
Yeah, I mean, collaboration is at the very heart of creative spaces. It kind of has to be. There aren't many industries in which you'd co-locate a roboticist and a jeweller, or a leather worker and a construction manager and a designer. We're all in there together, and I think part of that is because people are attracted to the space and the community. And collaboration goes with the community. It's hand in hand. A lot of the artists at Tortuga work together in the film industry, so there's a lot of collaboration within the space between screen printers and set designers and set builders and art directors. But we're also connected to all those other creative spaces and studios, so there's a much broader network in that. And I think there's real safety in that, and so the creative spaces act as a magnet to other creatives. They come, they feel safe, they feel protected, they're looked after, and these are amazing places to try, to innovate, to give it a go. And I think what Marcus was saying about there not being the funding and us having to do it ourselves, that's very much a pattern of the spaces that I've been involved in. And so you kind of have to create that community and have to create that collaboration, otherwise you're going to sink.
How's it been for you, Sarah, you know, on that DIY tip and building such a huge poetry slam from that seed. What's your experience been like in collaborating and finding and opening space up for like-minded people?
Yeah, I mean, the only reason that we exist is because we were able to collaborate with Bankstown Youth Development Services, which is now Out Loud, and at the beginning they auspiced us and provide us with venue in kind, so that we could host the slam and open it up and make it a free event. And that's really what attracted people to it, was that no barrier to access, and that was really important for me, being a poor uni student at the time, trying to make sure that what I perceived to be a barrier, which was purchasing tickets, that wasn't there for anyone else. And we recently, towards the end of 2022, held a poetry festival that spanned 9 Western Sydney venues. And that was an incredible learning curve for me in terms of collaboration. I reached out to all of those venues and asked if we could have in-kind support to host different events there for the festival, like an anonymous slam, or boxing rounds of poetry, or panels and conversations and workshops and stuff. And everyone was so receptive and gave us the venue support for free. And sometimes we had to pay some production costs, but there was a real desire to do that and to have more of those collaborations. And I think that that's something that governments turn their minds to in terms of opening up grants that specifically endorse collaborative approaches. Any artist will tell you that, number one, they're like super poor, and number two, that it's such a competitive environment. I think the statistic I heard recently was writers only make like $12,000 a year. Like that's their average annual salary for like a successful writer. She's like incredibly nauseating. And it is so super competitive in the grants process. And it inevitably pits artists and pits organizations against each other. So yeah, I think having streams of funding where it's only open to collaboration actually entrenches that culture of community.
On that, cost of living, the other part of this is that there's audiences, are turning up, you would hope, to cultural events of all kinds. And this has gotten the most likes on Slido. So Kieran asks about discussing providing affordable spaces and venues, but how are we supporting audiences' abilities to go out and spend against the trend to stay in and save? I guess that, accessibility to events is something that it's been very front of mind for you in everything that you've done, hasn't it, Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest event we've ever held was actually in this room. We had 2,000 people here for our Grand Slam earlier this year, and we were able to have low cost tickets. So our adult tickets were only $35 and concession was, I think, about $20, because we received in-kind venue support from the City of Sydney to be able to put that on. So it is so incredibly hard to keep costs down, and we have a volunteer team. We don't really get paid in doing the work that we do, but I think that most people that you'll come across in the arts and culture industries are just so incredibly passionate and put in so many hours to try and make their art and their work accessible to all, but passion can only get you so far. We really need funding from all different avenues to be able to open people up to access it. And speaking as someone who never attended an art show or a theatre show, because I went to public schools until I was an adult, I never even thought of myself as a creative person and never saw myself in any of the art that I consumed. And I never thought that I would become an artist, an artiste. Like, it's something that is so, like, what I am now is an avatar of who I was in high school. I used to rap Tupac. Like, I'm just such a different person. And
are you though? Are you going to rap tonight?
I'm not going to rap. But I think that what art does and what access does, and when you have low barriers to access, is it opens you up to all these different ways and worlds of thinking, and that is so empowering for people, especially people from diverse backgrounds who have felt that their stories have been untold and who have felt that they have not really had any space or agency in these spaces for so long.
How does that speak to the London experience, Justine? Yes. Working with so many different communities and obviously working closely with artists, but what about the audiences and those people who, you know, you want to involve in the experience of art and culture?
Yeah, we do lots of different things, but maybe I'll just give a few examples. I was just thinking about this point about getting people out of their homes. One of the things we did to try and reboot the centre of London after the pandemic, which became a real ghost town, was we did a big campaign. It was called Let's Do London, and culture was really at the heart of that campaign. And it was kind of festival by footfall. So we were looking at the footfall and where the gaps were and where the cold spots were, and we were just putting culture in those spaces for free, because we realised that normally we see our competitors as Paris or Berlin or New York, and now our competition is the sofa. That's our competition. People, we need to get off the sofa. The stats for that were incredible, just in terms of offering something that was free in people's neighbourhoods. Similar example was the Cultural Olympiad, which is a while back, but it's a really interesting example of taking work out into the city. So when you, as you know, when you host the Olympics, not everyone in your city gets a ticket. And culture was one of the ways that we spread that kind of Olympic celebration across all of London's local boroughs. And when we got the results back, the demographic profile of the audiences, there were 5,000 events in that summer, exactly matched the demographic profile of Londoners, which is unprecedented. The third thing we're doing, which is a big kind of emblematic project with our mayor at the moment, Sadiq Khan, is the London Borough of Culture. So that is a celebration of a local borough, because London's a big global city. You tend to get lost in the big world city stories. So north, south, east, west, you know, they all bid to be the London Borough of Culture. And that is absolutely a spotlight on that borough. Its unique communities, its unique stories, all the stories that haven't been told. And again, all these things are about kind of revealing and connecting and celebrating at that local level. So I think there's lots of different ways in which we all try to do it. But keeping it free, keeping it local, keeping it authentic, working on the ground up are the principles, I think.
H, do you see any kind of correlation with the way that Sydney's communities look and act and could be in the future based on that kind of model?
Yeah, I do. I mean, we put on lots of shows at Tortuga, and they're always free, and they're always really well participated. People come from all over. We have a strong, loyal following, but we don't have any funding for that at all. And I think someone mentioned it before, we're sitting on a gold mine. We've got all these creative spaces all over the city. Why can't they be these new incubation spots, these new places where people can come and find out what it is that we're doing? And if we had funding to do that, we already have a strong connection with the local visual arts school. A number of the kids that have come from Tortuga are now at that school. And they're all crying out for some sort of experience to understand the creative industries better. But there's no funding model as yet beyond work experience, which clearly doesn't work because no one wants to sweep anymore. And we have lots of kids coming and they don't want to sweep, and so we need another model. But surely there's a correlation there between funding models and using the existing spaces which are full of culture and full of creativity, and trying to get the new generation in so that they understand better what they could potentially be doing.
Yeah, Alex, is there kind of a disconnect, do you think, between the Sydney spaces that we show and experience art and the Sydney art that we show in them?
Yeah, as I was saying before, I mean, it's that, you know, the exhibition spaces are so used for so much international content. We don't really activate it. I think it's the activation of place using culture, which is really exciting. And you see that sometimes with, say, Vivid this last couple of weeks, or the last 3 months you've had the Biennale of Sydney really activating an old power station that nobody stepped in 40 years or 100 years for general public. They become really exciting places, but it's really important that we use it in the right way. It's not used to import, as I would say, foreign cultural import, which is a very lazy way of doing it. We really need to use it for these amazing domestic stories and really lean into the most exciting parts of Sydney, which are Sydney is the creative capital of the country as it stands still, and we are also the multicultural capital of the country. And I think Sydney needs to lean into both of those and use our creative spaces for that purpose.
Can I just say, Alex, I agree with you 100%. And I think the way that we do that is by very early on, right, that we all start valuing and having this culture of valuing, that this is important, it enriches it, it means so much to us. Like, I think we probably are very bad, I would say, of valuing our Australian uniqueness, and I think that's where we could probably all collaborate more. Like, I remember coming to the town hall, I'd fallen in love with Sarah over a Zoom because we were on this thing together, but I came to felt like a cult-like experience, and it was like tears rolling down my face seeing these young artists, performing on the town hall stage. It was incredible. And then now, we have a connection and we can talk, but I think we're probably so siloed in our lanes, that we don't take the time to kind of connect, and we don't take the time to celebrate ourselves, actually. I think we're probably pretty bad at doing that as Australians.
Until now.
Till now.
Tonight's going to change everything.
Yeah, everything.
Marcus, your experiences, range from working with small artistic communities to very large companies. Where do you think, from your perspective, Sydney should focus its energies?
I think at a really basic level, it's come up a few times, but just the idea of validating culture from the ground up is really important. Culture is what you're into. Like, I'm oversimplifying, but when I was growing up in Newcastle, dead Europeans and rich, good-looking Americans made culture, and everyone else was doing some other thing, And it took me until I was well and truly grown up and had done a lot of stuff before I realised, this stuff that we're into, this is culture. This is our culture, and it cross-connects and collaborates with all of these other cultures around it. So I think it's incredibly important that we don't culture is so top-heavy in Australia. So much of the resources go into the big institutions, the big galleries, the infrastructure behind it. There are many, many more bureaucrats than artists getting paid to administer Australian culture, and I think it's incredibly important that we recognise that culture is what we all collectively make and value. So on the most basic level, I think that's really important. And then around that, if you start from that premise, you build a very different infrastructure than the one that you build if you're looking at showing off, glossy objects.
I've got a question that I want to throw out to the group. Anyone or no one can answer it. It's a big one. What's the biggest creative risk you'd like to see occur in Sydney?
Can I have a go? Flip it over. I just think you need to take a lot of failure is so important in culture. It's much more important that it's easy to fail than you're trying to support a bunch of people to succeed.
So risk should be taken out of it.
Well, I think risk, it's not about a big risk, because in a way, if you think about a big risk, it's we're going to build some massive thing, and if it fails, we just sunk a huge amount of money into a hole.
And then we don't revisit that, and we don't revisit that for a long time, and it kills it.
What you want is thousands of small failures taking place all the time, and this layer upon layer being built up from it, and it's got to be inexpensive to fail rather than expensive to succeed.
100%. Failing's the best. Anybody else want to tackle that one?
Look, I think I agree completely with you, but I think there is something about boldness, and I think that sort of underpins what Sydney is. I think, people do see it as bold and sparkly, and I think we can afford to take some big, bold, sparkly risks as well. I don't see a place that, in my industry, Disney owns the studios, it's hard to get in there. I would love something that kind of was a shiny, big thing that celebrated cinema and screen and games and things that cross cross-sections of our communities can come together. And I think a bold idea like that of like tech, innovation, AI, like let's really seize the moment and go and like, let's bring people with us and let's get people together and like butting heads, like the idea that you were talking about, Justine. Like I think it's terribly exciting that we could do something that, you know, there's a Sarah Mansour is there and that there's a Darren Dale and that there's Alex, we're talking about fashion with you. I think it would be wonderful if we could do a big, bold thing as well.
Yeah, I'd just like to reflect on this question of risk, because for me, sitting in my job, risk is like a really complicated kind of topic. You know, I talked about there being no votes in culture, and the territory between art and politics is really complicated to navigate, right? Politics is very monochrome, it's very black and white, art is all nuanced, meaning is kind of different depending on who you are. You know, politics is soundbite, meaning is fluid in art. And, you know, government is all about minimising risk. That is the goal of government, minimise all risk. When I first started at my job, we took over responsibility for Trafalgar Square in London. And the government had had responsibility before, and their singular goal was to minimise the risk to the extent that their policy was to have nothing happen. That was it. That was a policy.
Freeze it.
Yeah, that's it. Then there'll be no risk if nothing happens. Of course, now loads of things happen there. But of course, you know, culture is all about taking risks. And so I think what is brilliant about today is the real bravery of Clover and the team to put this plan out there, because it is risky. You know, and everyone's saying really similar things, and I think it's fantastic to see that kind of boldness from the city to say, we hear you, we're really getting into this thing deeply, and we're looking at how we can kind of pull those levers to make the difference we can, you know. So I just wanted to acknowledge that kind of complexity and risk that we're talking about today. You know, we love to be in blue sky thinking, but we're pragmatists. We're in a city needs to work, and this is the practical job of us, right?
Well, someone's actually asked on the Slido a statement and a question. Sydney is one of the most regulated cities in the world. How might governments have more faith and trust in its people as opposed to stifling creativity? We have many representations here in the audience tonight. What's your take on that, Sarah? Are you still thinking?
The minister's in the front row. No.
Speak directly to the minister. But it's true, like we're talking about this plan, but what is that, you know, I guess this is a faith-building exercise, right? How do we have faith in the next 10 years of this cultural strategy and that things are going to change? Any ideas?
Look, I think it's to the, you know, the minister and his predecessors have invested so much in the cultural infrastructure, but it's the art institutions which is the low-risk bet. Where I guess it's really the point that we need to invest in the grassroots and the next level down in the artists themselves, and have the courage to showcase them, not imports. It takes a lot of courage because the economic model is built on, Taylor Swift is a sure thing, so we'll invest in her, and that's our tourism model because it fits in the spreadsheet. It's not. It's much more difficult to say, well, what do we get out of this creative space that the two of you are producing? I mean, it's very difficult to see that output, but you create those communities. Back in the 80s, it used to be all of these warehouses at Darling Harbour were abandoned, and all the artists, that was their proving ground. They all squatted in these abandoned warehouses, and it created generations of the most amazing artists from illegally squatting, but sharing a creative hub, a creative community in that space. And they could be daring and learn and innovate and grow and network, and that became their careers. But where's the next generation? What are we doing for the next generation? It's very difficult to see.
Can I say, Australia, I think, has a really, we don't realise how much of a mess we've got ourselves into. We've got like probably the most over-rebbed financial property market in the world. Like, we've commodified property much more than pretty much anywhere else on earth. We have really disempowered and made very small local government. So local government doesn't really have a lot of levers to pull. If you visit London, if you visit New York, the tools they've got as a city to empower culture is so different to what the City of Sydney has, and the City of Sydney is tiny relative to the greater City of Sydney. We've got the American culture of suing everyone, which has led to this incredible sort of layer of regulation that's come in over the top. So we've just got this sort of confluence of forces that make it very difficult to support or for organic culture to emerge. And I think we need to recognise that that's where we're starting from. I should say something far more optimistic than that.
I love that you're saying this with 2 minutes to go, Marcus. What are you doing to me?
No, in the current context. But if you recognise that those are the forces that we're dealing with, then you start to think differently about how we can approach the problems. You realise that we do need to work at the state level. We need to work across government boundaries. We need to recognise that the way in which the property market works is a fundamental wrecking ball of cultural dynamics, and utilise you mentioned the superpower of planning and the other tools that we've got, the incentives that we may have available if we work across government and at a higher level to recognise those real problems. Because you cannot just take, some neat little idea that works in a city with a whole other set of powers and resources and expect it to work here.
Did you want to add anything, Sarah?
I was just going to say quickly that I think good governments listen, and I think we have a good government at the moment, and they are listening. And my primary example of that is chairing the Artist Advisory Panel in the creation of the state's first ever Arts and Culture and Creative Industries Policy, in which Darren was involved on the Ministerial Advisory Panel in capacity as an advisor there. Artists and people in the industry were really listened to, and the policy is a reflection of that, and all the steps that are being taken now are also a reflection of that, and I think being here tonight is a reflection of listening as well, and I think that's what we need to be doing more of.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for all listening to our wonderful panel tonight. Please join me in thanking Marcus, Darren, Alex, Sarah, H and Justine. Thank you all. It's a perfect actual segue into our very special final performance, and I will let you exit the stage because we need to fill this up with some others. Please give them a very warm welcome. Warm thank you again. And thank you for all your questions via Slido as well. To wind out tonight, we have a very special treat, and it really encapsulates that fourth pillar of the cultural strategy, creative participation, something that we've just been talking about, art for all. Before moving to his new role as CEO of Unlimited, Stephen Hunt co-founded a music company called Music Health Inc., which explored the potential for music to transform the healthcare industry. And tonight, Stephen will be performing with members of the St. Luke's Memory Lane Choir. The choir meets weekly at the Dementia Clinic at St. Luke's, and they've prepared a medley of songs that has special meaning to them. So please join them and sing along as well. I believe the words are going to be up on screen. To tell us more about what you're about to hear, please make him very welcome, Stephen Hunt.
Thanks, Zan. How's it going, everyone? You good? Well, I've got a surprise for you, but you already know what it is, right? And I promise I'll be really quick and we'll get to the choir because it is going to be amazing. But I bet at the end of this talk, you're all going to feel noticeably better than you do right now. And it's the kind of change that a pharmaceutical drug would struggle to replicate. So you're curious? Right, well, Zan already did the intro, but just really quickly, I am the CEO of a foundation called Unlimited, and we work with 29 different charities who are all focused on supporting kids who are at risk It's a really, really amazing organisation. But what drew me to Unlimited in part was the fact that they were brave enough a few years ago to launch their own social impact brand called Mood. Anyone seen Mood out there yet? Nah, not yet. Well, it's available in Woolies in the form of an award-winning tea at the moment. More to come. You might also see it in one of Australia's more famous banks very soon, and in your local council. And you never know, Clover, we might even be able to do something for you and the City of Sydney. But every time you enjoy a cup of tea from Mood, you'll know that 100% of the profits are going to those charities. So it's a good way to do good while doing something that you do every day if you're a tea drinker. But it's award-winning tea. Give it a shot. As Zan mentioned, before I started working with young people, I worked on the other end of life, which was equally important and beautiful. And my co-founder and I, Nick Johnson, he was my good buddy, we created Music Health to try to integrate music therapy into healthcare because we know that it has a profound impact. It's just not there. And our first product was called Vera, which is an award-winning app designed to help people with dementia find joy through the music that they used to love and reconnect with their old memories. Now, I'm pleased to say that Nick is still fighting the fight with Music Health and doing amazing things. He actually just did a really great exhibition at Vivid with Sennheiser. But he's trying to integrate that technology behind Vera into the fabric of healthcare. And you're probably wondering, why the hell do we need to put music into healthcare? So let me answer that. To use music to heal, if you think about it, it's actually human nature. Okay, a mother will instinctively soothe her baby by simply singing a song or a melody, whether she's trained musically or not. And it might surprise you to learn that the didgeridoo is one of the earliest forms of music therapy we know of. But the Indigenous people of Australia weren't the only ancient human culture to harness the power of music to heal. We see examples in Native Americans who used wind instruments, the Tibetan monks who still practice sound healing with bowls to this day, the Aztecs, the Incas, the ancient Greeks, the list goes on. And it's because music is inside all of us. And it's far more powerful than most of us give it credit for. Now, in case you can't tell, I love music. So my happy place is playing one of my many instruments with other people. And as I grew up, that was with my family. So I played with my parents and my sister and my aunties, my uncles and my grandparents and my opa. And I loved my opa. He was the kind of guy who retired to an orchard rather than relax. And when I was a teenager, he developed Alzheimer's disease. And I got to experience firsthand the tragedy that impacts over 55 million people around the world. And is sadly growing by another 10 million people every single year. Dementia. And while dementia is a death sentence with no known cure, it does not mean that you can't have many moments of joy that follow a diagnosis. There's quite a lot of stigma about the condition, but many people can live perfectly happy and wonderful lives despite it. Now, I think it's really important to clarify, because I didn't know this when I got into the space, but Alzheimer's is a disease, but dementia actually describes a collection of symptoms. So everybody who's living with Alzheimer's is experiencing dementia, but not everybody who's experiencing dementia has Alzheimer's disease, although about 80% of them do. But there are other forms of dementia like vascular and Lewy body. But in simple terms, dementia describes the progressive loss of cognitive function, but you and I probably most often associate it with memory loss. All right, enough explaining. Do you want to come on a journey with me? Yeah? You up for it? Okay. I want you to close your eyes. It's going to be a slow journey. Go on, close them. Take a deep breath in and let it out. Now imagine you're waking up for the day, but you don't recognize the room you're in. It makes you feel a little uneasy. So you call out for help. No one answers, but you can hear some people talking down the hall, so you call out again. And before too long, someone comes into the room wearing a mask. They know who you are, but you have no idea who they are. And they proceed to get you to sit on the bed and stand up before asking you to take your clothes off for a shower. Okay, open your eyes, stop there. How did that make you feel? A bit uneasy, I imagine. That's a brief glimpse into the potential daily reality of someone living with advanced dementia. They're frightened. And to cope with the anxiety this causes, they're likely to either retreat inward and hide from the world or even lash out in self-defense. And these changing behaviours are commonly observed in people living with dementia, and whilst there is no known cure, there is reprieve. It might sound simple, but playing familiar music could dramatically improve that situation. Music can ground that person back into a place of reality, helping to make activities of daily living like showering and feeding much more joyful and less difficult. Now, when I was at Music Health, one thing that we really understood was that our musical memories are far less impacted by dementia than other memories like names and faces. And when we stimulate those memories by playing music, we set off a chain reaction in the brain that, when looked at on an fMRI scan, is the equivalent of Christmas lights turning on. It's absolutely magic. And in that state, that person is much more likely to remember the names and the faces of the people around them. They have much better control of their fine and gross motor skills, making things like chewing, swallowing much easier. But most importantly, they are much more likely to remain calm because they're less scared. Now, when I was at Music Health, I used to work with people living with dementia by integrating precision music into their daily care routine. Precision music is defined as music that is personalised to that person, but that can elicit an emotional response. And you might not know this, but every sound we're hearing triggers an emotional response in our brain. So it's no wonder that music has the power to change the way we feel. The people I worked with had often forgotten what music they loved. And sadly, they also lived in or more commonly anyway, in an audio environment that was full of distress rather than calm. So a little bit like that shower scenario I just had you experience. Their days were too often filled with a fear of the unknown. But there's a good news story here. Recent research from Toronto University suggests that playing precision music on a regular basis can actually slow down cognitive decline. And this infers that a daily brain workout of your favourite music might actually help prevent dementia for those of us who are lucky enough to still do something about it. And hey, at the very least, it's going to put a smile on your face. So I want you to try this for yourself when you go home tonight. Think back to when you were 15 or 16 years of age. What song or album was on repeat that you haven't heard in years? Was it Nevermind by Nirvana? No, maybe? Jagged Little Pill by Alanis Morissette? Maybe? Or am I showing my age? Play that music and see what happens. I bet there's a good chance you're going to smile. You're going to feel a flood of positive emotions, and you might even have flashbacks to memories you forgot were even there. And that same experience can still be, that same thing can still be experienced by someone living with dementia on a daily basis. But there's one way we can go even deeper with this experience, and that is to sing. Because when we sing, we not only light up the brain, like I explained earlier, but we also release a flood of hormones that make us feel happy. And I've had the pleasure of singing with some incredible people who are using music to bring joy to their journey with dementia. And they've agreed to come here tonight so that we can all share in the magic of precision music together. So when I give you the cue, I want you to sing as loud as you can. Please join in, let go of your inhibitions, and we're going to have a real good time. All right, please welcome to the stage the Memory Lane Choir. So as Zan mentioned, this group meets weekly at St Luke's Care. It's just here in Potts Point. Incredible institution run by some incredible people. I can actually see down there. Hi. And it's a joy, it really is. So if you know somebody who is either on a journey with dementia or they're just starting, I highly encourage them to join a choir and to get involved. It's a really great way to socialise, to bring joy to the week, and we have an absolute ball. I keep coming back time and time again. And so just bear with us while we assemble. Oh, here's our pianist, Robert. Give Robert a round of applause. It's all right. Oh, we're a bit stuck. That's all right. Take your time. And for tonight, we've got 3 songs for you, but each song has a little surprise in it. So look out for those. All right, come forward. Here we go. Hello? Yeah, come on. Awesome. So remember, audience, this is all about group participation. So I'm going to be flashing the words up behind me for you, although I suspect you won't need them. These are pretty well-known songs. But I highly encourage you to let go. If you've ever been to pub choir, anyone? Show of hands. Think of this as massive pub choir, but this is town hall choir, all right? How are we feeling? We nearly ready? Okay, no sweat. Yep, that's okay. Yeah, one sec, Robert. Go for it.
You saw me standing alone without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own. Stars are
All right.
Give it up for Stephen Hunt and the St Luke's Memory Lane Choir, everyone. One more time.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. And thank you for singing along and being such an incredible audience. Feel free to make your way off the stage in your own time. You've done an amazing job. I've got some final things to share with the room tonight before we get on out of here. We'd love you to have your say. We've been talking a lot. We've been listening a lot. We want to hear from you. If you scan the new QR code on the screen or visit city.sydney/Sydney Your Say, you can give your feedback on this new City of Sydney cultural strategy or anything that you've heard tonight. In fact, if you subscribe to the Sydney Your Say newsletter, you'll receive a link to that cultural strategy, which is going to span 2025 to 2035. And yes, City of Sydney would love to hear your feedback. Thank you so much for attending tonight. It's not a great day out there. It's a bit blustery. You've come out. We're so appreciative. You've been an incredible audience. To discuss the future of Sydney's creative economy, to discuss the future of Sydney's cultural heart. Our next City Talks is going to be on Thursday, August the 1st, right here at the Sydney Town Hall, where we'll be discussing I Choose Sydney. What is driving future prosperity? Spoiler alert, it's culture. Tickets will be available in July. We do hope to see you then. I'm Zan Rowe. It's been a great pleasure and honour to be your MC tonight. Thank you so much for coming. Good night.